So let's start with the introduction. I find this title is as a problematic title. I will explain why it's so problematic for me and so difficult to talk about Maqasid and ethics together, not as two separated fields. So because first of all, the discourse on Maqasid and ethics both have become a major concern in the contemporary scholarship among specialists in Islamic studies in general, and sometimes in human sciences. But the problematic issue of Maqasid and ethics can be seen for many reasons, or can be seen for as it is now on the screen. So I will just raise three points regarding to this issue. I mean the problematic of Maqasid and ethics together. The first point, that the field of Maqasid, despite hundreds of books and research papers, conferences, etc., in recent decades still suffer from difficulties like no clear boundaries and no systematic and consistent methodologies. The plethora of available studies still could not help solve these problems. For example, one of these problems, the relationship between Maqasid and Islamic legal theory, usul al-fiqh, on one hand, and Maqasid and branches of jurisprudence, furu' al-fiqh, on the other hand, remained vague and problematic. So still, till now, we still have a controversial discussions regarding to these two issues. How can, or what's the link, what's the relationship between usul al-fiqh and Maqasid, and what's the relationship between Maqasid and fiqh itself? So, and how Maqasid theory will work in these two fields. Is Maqasid a separate branch from usul al-fiqh, the legal theory, or it's a part of it? So we still have a vague on this issue, on these two issues actually. And one of the difficult questions in this regard reads, do Maqasid just reveal the rationale of the already existing juristic rulings, ahkam, or do they determine the way through which ahkam should be deduced from the very beginning? So still we are discussing the role of Maqasid Sharia. So how can we benefit from Maqasid? How can we invest Maqasid nowadays? So is it just a philosophy to justify the existing rulings in Islamic jurisprudence during the history in the four jurisprudential schools, or it's a new methodology that can help us to deduce new rulings? So still, this is a very controversial issue. Some are trying to make it as a new methodology to deduce new rulings in Islamic jurisprudence, but still, to best of my known, I have no, I don't know that there are enough rulings, new rulings that were based on Maqasid Sharia, even after all these discussions on Maqasid. Still, we are dealing with the existing rulings in general. So still we have to address this fundamental question, how or what exactly the role of Maqasid Sharia dealing with the Islamic jurisprudence nowadays. So this is the first point, or the first problematic point regarding Maqasid Sharia. The second point is Islamic ethics itself. Islamic ethics as a contemporary field of scholarly inquiry is still in its embryonic phase. Classical trends have always considered ethics to be part of practical philosophy, الحكمة العملية, which includes three branches: self-discipline ethics, managing domestic family affairs, and governing the public. سياسة النفس وسياسة المنزل وسياسة العامة سياسة الناس. These are the three branches of the Greek philosophy, which can we understand that the place of ethics in the Greek philosophy was one of these three levels of disciplines. So the Islamic tradition, or some scholars in Islamic tradition, they relied on this Greek tradition to place ethics as one of these three levels. And these three levels are part of the practical wisdom, al-hikmah al-amaliyah. So in this case, that we are the Greek perception of ethics is out of the practical knowledge that were known in the Islamic tradition. So so in this case, it's still Islamic or ethics. So not Islamic ethics. Ethics still is a part of the Greek philosophy in this traditional perception. Now, the conception is based on the Greek philosophical heritage, although the Islamic heritage witnessed extensive and varied works on ethics in several areas such as Islamic theology, Sufism, jurisprudence, and adab. There is no theoretical basis for an independent discipline called ethics. Akhlaq, I mean, in the Arabic term. The long centuries separating Abu Ishaq al-Nadim, he died in the 4th century, and Haji Khalifa, he died in the 11th century, had no effect to breaking through this Greek philosophical paradigm. However, this situation has witnessed changes in modern times. From the late 19th century until mid-20th century, remarkable interest was invested in ethics, and this was reflected in publications, critical editions, and translation works, as well as independent studies adopting various approaches. So this is the second problematic issue when we talk about Maqasid and ethics. The first problem with the concept of Maqasid itself, still it's a controversial issue, and the role of Maqasid itself, and their link with its link with the Islamic jurisprudence and the principles of Islamic jurisprudence, usul fiqh, or the legal theory. And the second point, the problematic of ethics itself as a distinct field. So, because if you will go and have a look on the Islamic tradition, you will not find the distinction or distinct field which is called ethics or akhlaq as an independent field. We have Sufism, we have jurisprudence, Islamic jurisprudence, fiqh, we have usul fiqh, and we have other branches of knowledge. But we will not find an independent branch of knowledge which is called akhlaq as a ilm, as a science. And even still now in the Islamic faculties in the Muslim world, you will not find a specialty on Islamic ethics, for example, as an independent field, or specialty. But ethics is still studied as a branch of, or as a specialty of philosophy, not Islamic studies. So I think we are the first college in Qatar. I mean, the Qatar Faculty of Islamic Studies, or the College of Islamic Studies at Hamad bin Khalifa University. We are the first college that offer ethics, Islamic ethics, as a specialty of Islamic studies, not philosophy, as it is in the Arab world. The third point now is the relationship between maqasid and ethics. Now, so the first point, the problematic of maqasid, the second point, the problematic of ethics itself, and now the problematic of the link between them, the relationship between fiqh and maqasid and ethics. So the relationship between maqasid and ethics can only be addressed if the relationship between jurisprudence and ethics is settled. Are jurisprudence and ethics separate or mixed entities? This is also a long and problematic debate. How can we understand ethics, the link between ethics and jurisprudence, fiqh? Still, it's problematic again. So for all these points, it's so difficult for me to talk about the link or the maqasid and ethics in the in the contemporary scholarship. Anyway, based on the above, a complex problem arises when maqasid are combined with ethics as two problematic areas in contemporary Islamic thought, especially since each one of them is approached as a system or pattern. Hence, neither of them can be viewed from a single angle. Instead, it should be viewed holistically. So we are talking here about two systems, two approaches: ethics on the one hand and maqasid on the second hand. So and here we are not talking about two partial issues. We are talking about two paradigms, two disciplines. So how can we mix between them? How can we understand or approach them? Two distinct and systematic disciplines. So now I will move to the second point, the contemporary ethical approaches. Let's start now, let's explore how the link between all these problems that I already mentioned, how were studied in the contemporary scholarship. I mean, the link between Islamic jurisprudence and fiqh, ethics and fiqh, maqasid and ethics, and the other points. So here I will summarize 7 or 8, I think, eight studies or 8 approaches in this regard. The first one is written by Muhammad Abdullah Draz. He wrote his thesis at the end of the 40th in the 20th century. I think he did his PhD in France in Sorbonne, at Sorbonne University, 1947. His thesis entitled "The Moral World of the Quran," Dustur al-Akhlaq fil Quran. It was translated later. It was written in French originally, and it was translated in the 70s, entitled "Dustur al-Akhlaq fil Quran al-Karim." So it's available in French, English, and Arabic for those who prefer one of these languages. So Dustur al-Akhlaq fil Quran, the moral world of the Quran, written by Muhammad Abdullah Draz. He was an Azhari scholar. He was very famous. And he provide us a very essential and important contribution in this regard, in ethics, I mean. He identified key moral concepts, including obligation, responsibility, accountability in the hereafter, intention, motivation, and effort. So these 5 elements or components are the 5 essential components in any moral theory. المسؤولية, obligation, الواجب, المسؤولية, الجزاء, النية, الدافع, والجهد. These are the 5 key concepts in any moral philosophy, and he built his argument in his book on these 5 elements or components in the Quranic discourse. So he discovered and explored the Quranic discourse, the moral theory in the Quran based on these elements, 5 elements. So, and he provided us a Quranic theory on ethics or on morality. For Draz, the concept of obligation is the most compelling moral element in the Quran, which reconciliation between 3 components take place: natural disposition, fitra, freedom, and revelation. If I will, based on the discussion that was raised by Brother Shawqi, you will understand the importance of these 3 elements or components. I mean the discussion between Ash'arites, Maturidis, and Mu'tazilis about the role of a human being nowadays, or the responsibility of a human being about his action or her action. So here Abdullah Draz is trying to combine between 3 main elements: Niyya, revelation, natural disposition, that there is something inner the human being that can motivate him or her to do the action. So it's not a matter of reason or abstract reason, and it's not a matter of only the text or revelation, but there is fitra, something inside the human being, and freedom, the freedom of acting, and the revelation together. So these 3 components are the essential components of the Quranic moral philosophy of action. So here he is trying to avoid or pass the discussion between Mu'tazility, Ash'arites, and others. Draz also attempted to employ examples from Islamic jurisprudence, from fiqh. So he was trying to find or to reflect that how this Quranic theory, moral theory, is reconciling or how it's reconciled with the existing Islamic jurisprudential rulings already. So he reconciled between the fiqh, the ruling fiqh, the ahkam fiqhiyya, it's already existing, and this new theory that he derived from the Quran, from the Quranic text. The second approach is written by George Hourani. George Hourani approached Islamic ethics through the lens of theological discussions. And he also examined Al-Ghazali treatment of the ethics of action in 3 of his books: الاقتصاد في الاعتقاد, إحياء علوم الدين, and المستصفى في أصول الفقه. These three books are falling in three different disciplines: legal theory, أصول الفقه, تصوف, Sufism, and كلام, theology. So الاقتصاد في الاعتقاد is a book in the theology, the علم الكلام, Islamic theology, and الإحياء is a book is a book in Sufism, and المستصفى is already mentioned in أصول الفقه. So he's trying. I mean, Horani tried to explore a consistent theory on the human action, the moral human action in the Al-Ghazali vision, from these three books in three different disciplines. And he came to the conclusion that the main interest for man is personal salvation. Thus, the concept of obligation as essentially connected with the social justice is absent from Al-Ghazali's ethics. So he found that there is a consistent theory on human action, but there's absent, this connection between the human action and the social justice is absent in the view of George Horani. So, but I don't agree with this, because I think this is not accurate, because if you will have a look on the theory of حقوق, the rights in the Islamic jurisprudence, and Al-Ghazali is a part of this discussion, a very rich discussion in the whole Islamic jurisprudence, you will find that the three types of حقوق, three types of rights: the right of God, the right of human being, and the right is shared between God and human being. So he can, if he used these three types of rights and analyze Al-Ghazali's work, he will find different. He will come up with to different conclusion. That even the ethics of action, human action, is connected to social justice or the social practice. It's not only about individual salvation, that everybody will only care about his salvation, his individual salvation, or personal salvation. The third approach was written by Majid Fakhri. Majid Fakhri wrote his book entitled Ethical Theories in Islamic Ethics. It was published in the first edition, 1991, I think. So he studied the Islamic tradition and organized his material in different categories and called it Ethical Theories in Islam. He avoided the contemporary period for purpose. So he only focused on the tradition, the Islamic tradition. I think he started at the 11th century, from the beginning to the 11th century. Anyway, but if we will have a look on the work of Majid Fakhri, we will find that he neglected Islamic jurisprudence. So he neglected the ethical discussions offered by Islamic jurisprudence and usul fiqh, Islamic legal theory. He focused on other different schools in Islamic tradition that he found the moral theory in their literature. I will explain them later. I will come to this classification of ethics in the third point. Now, the fourth approach is written by Hashim Kamali. Hashim Kamali focused on the link between ethics and law. And he found that the distinction between Islamic law and morality lies in the five-fold moral categorization within the system of Islamic jurisprudence, whereby the obligatory and forbidden have their legal implications, while the three remaining intermediate concepts lie in the realm of morality or ethics, which cannot be adjudicated as laws. So he separated between law and ethics. And this conception is very problematic. Why? Because he put the obligatory and prohibited out of the ethics. And if we will have a look on the theory of Draz, the moral word of in the Quran, we will find obligation is essential in any moral theory, but at the same time it's essential in the Islamic jurisprudence, of course. And this is the core. Obligations and prohibitions are the core of the fiqhi theory. Awamir wal nawahi. It's essential in the fiqhi theory. So in the historical background, he found, Hashim Kamali found that in Islamic societies, there was another institution that played a role in safeguarding morality, namely the institution of Hisba, loosely translated as controlling public morality. So Hashim Kamali focused on 2 points. The first one is the link between ethics and law, and he put the morality, he restricted the morality into the three rules, while the law is restricted to the 2 rules, obligatory and prohibition. The other 3 rules, you know that we have 5 rules. The other 3 are recommended, mustahab, disencouraged, makruh, and permitted, mubah. So he restricted ethics to only these 3 categories, or 3 categories, or 3 rulings: mandub, makruh, and mubah. Now the 5th approach is written by Kevin Reinhart. Kevin Reinhart focused on Islamic jurisprudence as Islamic ethics. He said that Islamic law and legal theory must be the true locus of the discussion of Islamic ethics. And the fiqh process is highly formal and has as its aim to understand the import of revelation from human moral life. And Reinhart found that the five fiqhi categories of acts, obligatory, prohibited, recommended, discouraged, permitted, is not merely the Islamic understanding of the abiding moral form of life. Rather, it is at the same time a repudiation of the accuracy of the simple bipolarity moral categorization of good and bad. Brother Sheikh Shawqi mentioned that the theological discussion focused during the history on the 2 categories, qabih, hasan and qabih, good and bad. But these 5 rulings were provided by Muslim jurists are 5, not 2. So they are much better than the binary the 2 rulings, because it covers the complexity of the human action and all the options that offered by the human actions. You know? So the 5 rulings are a kind of rejection, the binary or the 2 categories were mentioned or raised by mutakallimin, by theologians, Muslim theologians. So the five categories represent an inclusive moral system, since it recognizes the two-tier membership in Muslim societies, those who live between the boundaries of the obligations and prohibitions, and those who strive to adhere to the recommended and to avoid discouraged acts. So these 5 rulings are very helpful to cover or to judge the complexity of human action, and to cover these two groups, and especially those who are playing around the boundaries. Sometimes the boundaries are not clear. So we know that we have obligatory or obligation and prohibition. So, but it's not always, the boundaries is not always clear between these two rulings, because there are a lot of especially in the modern world, modern time, most of our actions are on the boundaries. So, and this is a very essential. Now I will add to what Reinhard said. There is a very essential point that were mentioned or raised by Shatibi in his book Al-Muwafaqat, that we can benefit from it and invest it to develop a new discussion in this regard. He mentioned a specific expression 4 times in his book. وَكُلُّ أَحَدٍ فَقِيهُ نَفْسِهِ. He said that everybody is the judge of himself. So he can judge himself on his actions. Does it mean that there is no need for Muslim jurists? No, he doesn't mean that. But he means that there are boundaries between these two, or there are actions lie between these two boundaries, obligations and prohibitions. So who will decide or judge these actions, whether it's prohibited or obligatory? The human being himself. He can judge himself. So maybe I will come later to this point to give more explanation about that. The 6th approach is written by John Kelsey. John Kelsey, he studied Al-Risala by Al-Shafi'i. Al-Risala is a very primary source on Islamic legal theory, usul al-fiqh, and it's the first source that we know till now that was written in usul al-fiqh. So he studied Al-Risala, but he studied Al-Risala as an example of an approach to ethics that focuses on divine comments, and Kelsey presented some observations on the place of Shafi'i's theory in the history of Islamic ethics, particularly with respect to his comments on the ethics of ikhtilaf, disagreement. So he approached Al-Risala as an example of Islamic ethics, focusing on the divine comment theory. The seventh approach is provided by the Professor Taha Abdul Rahman, or the philosopher, Moroccan philosopher Taha Abdul Rahman. Taha Abdul Rahman wrote many books, and he is one of the most prominent philosophers in the Arab world who presents an integrated and detailed study of the relationship between maqasid and ethics. He even considers maqasid as the science of ethics, as a moral theory. And he provided many details about that. I will go in details about this theory tomorrow, inshallah, in the lecture, in my lecture tomorrow. So I'm not going to give details now about his theory in this regard. The eighth approach is provided by Tariq Ramadan. In many of his books, especially Radical Reform and Introduction to Islamic Ethics, Ramadan gave special focus on ethics and introduced it as the core and heart of Islamic tradition. So he sees ethics as essential, or as a core or a center of Islamic tradition. So now we have 8 approaches regarding this issue in the contemporary scholarship. If we will analyze all these, I'm not going to give details about, of course, about the approach of Tariq Ramadan. He will give you, he will talk about himself. So, and this is why I just briefly mentioned his name in this regard. So we have now 8 approaches. If we will analyze all these approaches, we'll find that we will find they tackled or they addressed this this topic. I mean, ethics and maqasid, or ethics and Islamic jurisprudence in principle, from different angles. As for Draz, he provided us a Quranic approach. He focused on the Quran and he tried to explore the Quranic theory, moral theory, as the Quran was not essential in the discussions on ethics in the Islamic tradition, as he claimed. So with Draz, we are talking about Quranic approach, but with Hurani, we are talking about theological approach. So Hurani focused on theology, Islamic theology, to provide us some ethical dimensions or concepts in the different theological schools in Islamic tradition. With Majid Fakhri, we can talk about the historical approach. He explored the Islamic tradition in a specific period of time, and he tried to summarize and categorize or organize the material based on different elements, and he came up to the conclusion that we have 5 theories, 5 types of theories in Islamic ethics. So I can call it a historical approach. He has no specific argument, but he was exploring the Islamic tradition in general, to see how the Islamic tradition addressed the ethical dimensions or ethical question. With Hashim Kamali, we are among ethics and law, the relationship between ethics and law, which is a contemporary or modern issue. It's a part of the modernity. It's not a part of the classical time. It's a part of the modernity, Western modernity, this dilemma between ethics and law. With Kevin Reinhart, we are among Islamic jurisprudence as Islamic ethics. So he approached Islamic jurisprudence as an ethical field itself. And with John Kelsey, we are among legal theory as Islamic ethics. So he approached usul al-fiqh, Islamic legal theory, as a source of Islamic ethics, or as a discipline of Islamic ethics. With Taha Abdul Rahman, he approached Maqasid as a moral philosophy. He thinks that Maqasid is a moral philosophy. And I will explain his theory tomorrow, inshallah. With Tariq Ramadan, we are among repositioning the authority. He wants to move from the centrality of fiqh to the centrality of ethics. And it's a controversial issue, and I can discuss this critically among him, not behind him. When he comes, we can have a discussion about this. Okay, so we have all these 8 approaches: Quranic approach, theological approach, historical approach, fiqhi approach, usuli approach, and maqasidi approach, and the centrality of the last one is the centrality of ethics, not fiqh. So as you see now, we have different angles or approaches to address the ethical question, or the question of ethics in Islamic tradition and Islamic sciences, العلوم الإسلامية أو العلوم الشرعية. I will offer you tomorrow, inshallah, I will offer you in my lecture how can we tackle or address Islamic ethics nowadays based on all these rich tradition or literature, and how can we combine between all these approaches to come with the Islamic ethical theory. I will give some ideas. It's not mature yet, but I will give some ideas about this issue tomorrow, inshallah. Sorry? لا. Yeah. Okay. So the last point, I will avoid the 4th point. So it seems that I spent most of my time. The classification of ethics. Ethics is not easy subject, as you know now, after all these approaches and discussions. You know now it's not easy subject to study in the context of Islamic civilization. And many Orientalists claim that the modern concept of ethics is based in Islam, is absent in Islam, sorry. So the modern concept of ethics is absent in Islam. And fiqh is merely a body of legal rulings reflecting the interrelation between religion and politics. It is clear that the contemporary studies provide a crucial critique for this thesis and have gone far beyond it. The essential point here is that ethics is well defined both as a concept and area of traditional philosophical studies, especially in the Greek philosophy. But the problem arises in Islamic tradition in how to define the nature and range of Islamic ethical thought without on the one hand, importing and imposing upon it Western conceptual categories, and on the other hand, accepting such broad and elastic a definition for ethics which include every moral sentiment ever expressed. George Hourani developed two sets of criteria based on method and sources in order to classify types of Islamic ethical thinking. Yeah, this was raised by the Orientalists, so it's not, yes, that's what they said, but it's not scientific in my opinion, of course, yeah. And this is why I just mentioned quickly. So the two criteria were provided by George Hourani based on method determine whether ethical positions are arrived at through the prescription of a higher authority or through analytical thinking, normative and analytical ethics in the word of Hourani. While the two criteria based on the sources of ethical knowledge determine whether it comes from secular or religious sources, secular and religious ethics. So in this case, he has four categories for the classification of ethics. Number one, normative religious ethics. Number two, normative secular ethics. Number three, ethical analysis in the religious tradition. Number four, ethical analysis by secular philosophers. Of course, in my opinion, that it's very problematic to use secular here. And what's the definition between, what's the difference between secular, classical secular, if I will add this word here, because he's talking about the tradition, not about the modern time. So how can we use this term, which is a part of the modernity, and to explore, to express the tradition in the classical time? But anyway, he provided us these classifications, four categories for the classification of Islamic ethics, not Islamic ethics. So Majid Fakhri organizes his material according to a typology of ethical theories, and he came up with four types: scriptural morality, theological theories, philosophical theories, and religious theories. Still, it's very problematic to have these categories, and it's not clear the distinction between all these categories. Sometimes it's not clear, the borders between these theories are not clear in his book, especially the distinction between philosophical and theological theories. And how can we define, for example, the distinction between scriptural and religious? So how can we define the religious ethics and scriptural ethics? So it's not clear in his opinion, I think. So I'm not satisfied with his contribution anyway, but maybe we can discuss this later in the discussion. So other authors spoke about four main topics of discussion nowadays. We are not talking here about Islamic ethics, about ethics in general. So descriptive ethics, normative ethics, meta-ethics, applied ethics. Descriptive ethics, normative, meta-ethics, applied ethics. So as you see that even the classifications of ethics is very controversial, and we don't have an agreement on that. So based on this and the points that I already raised in the introduction, So you can understand that how it's not easy to address the ethics in the contemporary scholarship. And I will stop here, and we'll leave some time for the discussion. Thank you very much.